She had just wanted to eat her meal in peace. But now, 40 pairs of eyes were on her, some watching with quiet pity, others with smug amusement. And the flight attendant? She stood there, arms folded, daring her to make a scene. This was supposed to be a routine trip, a business flight from New York to San Francisco. Nothing more. But what they didn't know was that the woman in seat 2A wasn't just another passenger. She was Janelle Carter, the CEO of one of the fastest growing tech firms in the country. But at that moment, none of it mattered. Not the billion-dollar valuation, not the Forbes cover, not the 18-hour workdays or the sacrifices that got her there. Because to that flight crew, she was just a black woman in a tailored suit, sitting in first class. Janelle had arrived at JFK Airport that morning like she always did, early, composed, unnoticed. Her assistant had offered to arrange a private jet. She declined. "I like being around real people," she'd said, with a small smile. And maybe, deep down, she just liked being underestimated. The terminal buzzed with that usual, impersonal chaos. Business travelers scrolling through PowerPoints. Families wrangling toddlers and carry-ons. Flight announcements garbled over the intercom. Janelle was calm, measured. Everything about her, from the way she carried her coffee to the way she nodded to the gate agent, said power without ego. Not flashy, just focused. But then it happened. An hour into the flight, the cabin crew rolled out the meal service, and somehow everyone around her got their pre-ordered meals. Everyone, except her. She waited patiently, then politely asked. The attendant looked her up and down. "Oh, ma'am," she said with a smirk. "First-class meals are for first-class passengers. I can offer you something from economy if you'd like." Silence. It wasn't just what she said. It was how she said it. Like Janelle didn't belong. Like her presence in that seat was a mistake, or worse, an insult. Janelle didn't flinch, didn't raise her voice, didn't threaten, didn't explain. She simply looked down and then slowly pulled out her phone. One call, just one. No one saw her cry. She didn't. But in that moment, in that tight, recycled air cabin, something shifted. She stayed silent, but made one quiet phone call that changed everything. Long before the suits, the boardrooms, or the billion-dollar deals, Janelle Carter was just a little girl growing up in Brooksville, a sleepy southern town no one had ever heard of unless they got lost on the highway. Her house was small, her world even smaller, a place where dreams didn't stretch too far past the county line, and people who looked like her were told, not asked, to stay in their place. She was 8 the first time someone called her too smart for her own good. A teacher, of all people. She had just finished her math test in half the time, handed it in with a quiet smile. He glanced at the paper, then at her, and said, "You know, girls like you should focus on being polite, not clever." That was the day Janelle stopped raising her hand in class, but she never stopped learning. By 12, she was running a mini tutoring business from her front porch. Not for money, for power. Every time someone older, someone who'd once mocked her, came asking for help, she realized knowledge wasn't just something you had, it was something you could wield. The bullying? Constant. Her clothes weren't cool enough, her skin too dark, her hair too much. She'd walk through school hallways like a ghost with armor, but she was always listening, always watching, and somewhere in the back of her mind, she stored every cruel smirk, every backhanded compliment, every time someone made her feel small, not for revenge, for fuel. By 16, she'd hacked her school's broken computer lab system and rebuilt it from scratch. By 19, she'd been rejected from 3 internships. All less qualified applicants were accepted. She smiled anyway. And by 27, she launched Nova Bridge Technologies from her cramped apartment in Atlanta. No investors, no handouts, just caffeine, code, and years of swallowed pride. And then she scaled it into a $600 million empire in just 5 years. No scandals, no noise, just results. People still underestimated her. She let them, because she had learned early that silence was not surrender. It was strategy. So when that flight attendant dismissed her on that plane, when everyone assumed she was just another business traveler with no real power, Janelle didn't react because she'd trained her whole life for moments like this. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was calculated. The plane cruised at 35,000 feet, but the temperature in seat 2A had dropped below freezing. Janelle sat still, legs crossed, hands folded neatly in her lap, her face unreadable. To the average passenger, she looked calm, maybe even bored. But inside her mind, every detail was being recorded, noted, filed. The smirk from the flight attendant, the delay in service, the condescending tone like she was the one who had done something wrong. "Sorry, we must have missed you," the same attendant said half an hour later, dropping a lukewarm plastic tray on her fold-out table. Her voice syrupy sweet, but not a trace of apology in her eyes. Another attendant passed by shortly after and whispered something to her coworker. They both laughed, loud enough to be heard, quiet enough to pretend it was nothing. Janelle didn't move, didn't blink. She simply picked up her fork and began to eat. A man 2 rows ahead turned and gave her a once-over. He leaned toward the woman beside him and muttered, "Probably upgraded on points or something." The woman chuckled and replied, "Yeah, definitely not old money." She heard every word, and just like everything else on that flight, she logged it away. Hours passed. The sky outside turned bruised and orange as the sun began to set over the clouds. Passengers dozed off, laptops closed, books shut, but Janelle stayed awake, eyes open, watching. She watched the attendants laugh with the older couple in 1C, watched them refill champagne glasses with ease, avoiding her row every time. Watched them ignore the elderly man across the aisle when he asked for help. It wasn't just her, it was anyone who didn't look like they belonged. The difference? They didn't have what she had. When the wheels finally touched the ground in San Francisco, there was a collective sigh of relief across the cabin. A voice over the intercom cheerfully welcomed them and thanked them for choosing the airline. For Janelle, it felt like the end of a test she hadn't studied for, but somehow still aced. She stood up, grabbed her sleek black carry-on, and smiled politely at the attendants as they nodded goodbye. They still had no idea. The moment her heel hit the terminal floor, she pulled out her phone again. One tap, then another. A message sent. A call answered. A short conversation. Calm, composed, direct. And then, she disappeared into the crowd. They had no idea they had just disrespected a woman who could dismantle their entire careers before baggage claim. But they were about to find out. The plane had landed nearly 40 minutes ago. Most passengers were already halfway to their hotels or homes, dragging suitcases behind them. But back at Gate 12B, something strange was unfolding. The flight crew hadn't been allowed to leave. "Can we at least grab our bags?" one attendant asked nervously. "Please remain where you are," the gate agent replied, eyes glued to the monitor. Something was wrong. The captain looked uneasy, pacing near the jet bridge. A ground supervisor, someone none of them recognized, had arrived with 2 airport security officers in tow. He wouldn't say why. Then came the message. "You're all being held for a post-flight review. Please cooperate." No explanation, no warning, just that eerie professional tone that said, "You're not in control anymore." 10 minutes later, the question started. "Were all premium services delivered on this flight? Any complaints from first-class passengers? Any unreported incidents of misconduct or bias?" The flight attendant who refused Janelle's meal began to sweat. She stammered through her answers. The others watched, wide-eyed and silent. Something bigger was happening, and none of them could figure out why. Then the energy in the room shifted. A man in a charcoal gray suit walked in, flanked by 2 airline officials. He looked important. He was important. Regional Director of Customer Operations. Not someone who popped in for routine check-ins. Not someone who smiled. He didn't speak right away, just scanned the faces in front of him. And then, she walked in. Janelle Carter. Same sharp suit, same quiet power. Only this time, no seat number, no tray table, just the unmistakable presence of someone in control. The room fell silent. Even the director turned to face her, hands folded respectfully. One of the attendants took a step back. Another went pale. They knew. They knew. The director cleared his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce you to Ms. Janelle Carter, the CEO of Orion Holdings. A pause. The parent company that, as of last quarter, holds majority ownership of this airline. Gasps. Real, audible gasps. The same attendant who'd refused her meal looked like she might faint. Janelle glanced around the room slowly, deliberately. Her voice was calm, measured, deadly. I was on flight 7287 today, she began, and I saw everything. The room felt colder now. No air conditioning, just dread. The first flight attendant, the one with the smirk, had stepped forward. Her voice shook. Ms. Carter, I didn't realize. If I had known who you were. Janelle tilted her head slightly. I see, she said. The words were soft, but not forgiving. Another attendant jumped in, desperate. We were just following protocol. It wasn't personal. Janelle raised a hand. Silence. She looked around at the uniformed faces, some ashamed, some angry, some terrified. Then she spoke, slowly, clearly, unshakably. You judged me by the seat I was in, not the life I built to get there. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Every word dropped like a stone in a still lake. She turned to the regional director. Effective immediately, she said. The crew members involved in this incident are to be suspended pending final review. Any employee found to have violated our anti-discrimination policy is to be terminated. No one interrupted. No one protested. Then her eyes landed on the pilot, a middle-aged man with steady hands and kind eyes. You, she said gently. I remember what you did. He looked confused. You brought me a water when no one else would, she said. You looked me in the eye. He said nothing, just nodded once, respectfully. You'll stay, she said, and I suggest you apply for our leadership mentorship program. There's a future here for the right kind of leaders. Moments later, the company's PR team entered the room. Tight suits, tense faces, phones buzzing in their hands. They had been briefed, but the damage had already begun. Social media had caught wind of the incident. A tweet had gone viral. Black CEO gets denied meal in first class, owns the airline, fires the crew, retweets in the thousands, comments pouring in. Some praised her, some questioned her, but everyone was talking. The airline board was already in crisis meetings. Damage control was underway. A press statement was being written. Sensitive words like unfortunate incident, commitment to diversity, and internal investigation floated through hushed conference calls. But Janelle, she wasn't worried. She'd seen worse, felt worse, and built herself through the storm. This was just another necessary correction, and she didn't owe anyone an apology. By sunrise the next morning, the story had already broken into every major news outlet. Black CEO fires entire flight crew for racial bias on first-class flight. CEO power move, airline exec takes action after being disrespected in first class. From passenger to power, how a quiet woman changed an industry in one flight. Within hours, the video clips began surfacing. Grainy cell phone footage from another first-class passenger, uploaded to TikTok, showed the tense post-landing moments. Janelle walking calmly through the gate, the stunned expressions, the flight crew whispering to each other in disbelief. The post was captioned, "You never know who's watching." Gersi Warner Karma. It hit 3 million views in 8 hours. On Twitter, the discourse was immediate and polarizing. She did what needed to be done. Tired of black women being disrespected in silence. If she was a white male billionaire, they would have polished her shoes mid-flight. Power move or overreaction? I need her to run for office, immediately. But not everyone was cheering. She shouldn't have waited until after the fact to say who she was. So now CEOs can fire people over vibes? This is cancel culture at 35,000 feet. The hashtags were trending worldwide. Number CEO Flightgate, number first class justice, number fly right or get fired news. Shows picked up the story by noon. Former crew members were already doing damage control. One appeared anonymously on a morning show. We didn't know who she was. I admit the tone might have been off, but firing the whole team? Overkill. Another off-camera said bluntly, she was testing us, like we were part of some corporate experiment. And then the memo leaked. An anonymous employee from corporate posted an internal communication to Reddit. The memo, dated 2 days before the flight, read, Ms. Carter will be conducting unscheduled first-hand evaluations across several of our airline assets. Her identity is not to be disclosed or acknowledged unless she initiates the conversation. The internet lost it. She wasn't just a passenger. She was undercover. She had boarded that plane intentionally, not just to travel, but to observe. And what she saw, she corrected, quietly, permanently, powerfully. Now thousands were flooding the comments on her company's page, some asking for jobs, some sharing their own experiences, some just saying thank you. And in homes across the country, little girls, especially those who looked like Janelle, were watching. One tweet said it best. She didn't clap back. She didn't yell. She didn't demand attention. She just owned the airline. That's how you change the game. The set was quiet, minimal, tasteful. Just 2 chairs, a couple of microphones, and a backdrop that read, Voices That Matter. Janelle sat across from the host, legs crossed, expression serene. No designer labels, no entourage. Just a woman, a story, and the truth. The interviewer leaned forward, eyes wide. You had the power to embarrass them publicly, to destroy careers instantly. But you didn't yell. You didn't even speak up in the moment. Why? Janelle smiled softly. Because power doesn't have to be loud, she said, and real change doesn't always come with a headline. Sometimes it starts in silence. The audience held their breath. We're not asking for special treatment, she continued, her voice steady. Just humanity. She looked straight into the camera now. No hesitation, no script. Just her. You don't know who's sitting next to you, on a plane, in a boardroom, in line at the grocery store. Don't assume, don't judge. Treat everyone with dignity, not because of who they might be, but because it's the right thing to do. The interviewer was silent for a moment, then nodded. And to the people who still say you went too far, they asked. Janelle shrugged gently. Then they've never been underestimated for the skin they're in, the seat they're in, or the silence they chose. Across the country, millions watched that clip. Some nodded, some cried, some replayed it. But in one small apartment in Detroit, a 10-year-old girl named Layla watched it over and over. She had skin like Janelle's, hair like hers too, and a notebook full of business ideas that she'd never shown anyone, until now. She turned to her mom and said, I want to be like her. Janelle never heard that sentence, but in some ways, it was the most powerful outcome of all, because this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about firing a flight crew. It was about changing the expectation of how women are treated, of how Black professionals are seen, of how power is wielded with grace instead of rage. And maybe, just maybe, it was about reminding the world that quiet doesn't mean weak. Sometimes silence is the loudest justice of all. If you've ever been underestimated or stood up for what's right, tell your story in the comments. And if you believe silence can be powerful, hit that like button.